There.
Okay. All right. Looks like it's 10:01 and we've got a half hour here. So I'm going to, for all of those attending, we're going to jump right in and get today's webinar going. So welcome, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about flood claims, a roadmap. And as you can see on video here today, we have Clay Barclay, who is our guest and owner of BAC Adjusting, and we'll get into Clay. We'll get with Clay here in just a second. We're going to first just give the overview we usually give about who we are as the Massachusetts Coastal Coalition. For those that may not have interacted with us before, we are a local regional, and at times national nonprofit that deals with the education advocacy around flood issues and information around flood issues. So there's a little bit about us here. I'm not going to go through everything because many of you are familiar with us and the work that we do. So today we're going to be talking to Clay Barclay. He is the president of BAC Adjusting. And as you can see, I put a little blurb about what BAC does. And what's really interesting, and I think the perspective that Clay is going to be able to give us today, is the breadth of the types of risks that that BAC does, anywhere from your residential single family all the way up to your complicated condo association claims. And today we're really taking a kind of a different approach in our conversation. Rather than going through a bunch of slides for everybody to try to read, we're going to have a dialogue with Clay. And I really like that format for today, because if anyone in the audience has questions, feel free to chat us during today's conversation. I'll read the questions to Clay to make sure that they get answered. But really the importance of today's Flood Risk Friday webinar is to take you down the road of what happens before, during, and after a flood claim. And we have some very pointed questions that will help address some of the common issues that we see during the flood claims process, especially now during COVID-19. And of course, FEMA has issued bulletins on how claims can be handled digitally. And while there hasn't been a ton of claims since COVID started, I imagine there's probably the most that we've seen so far was from the last hurricane that came up the East Coast. As Clay and I were talking before we got into today's presentation, there are now 2 tropical systems that very well could be hitting our Gulf Coast at the exact same time. And so this is going to be a really interesting situation. Clay, I don't know if you were just looking at some weather maps before we jumped on. What is your, you're actually in Mobile, right? You're in right on the coast of the Alabama coast. So tell us a little bit about your perspective on the tropical systems coming your way.
Well, it's starting to look a little bit more certain. We're going to get a little bit higher winds than I thought we were going to get looking at information yesterday. Of course, the things we do now, anytime you have a system coming towards you, you make sure that you at least have some idea, especially with, like, for instance, my house that's on Dolphin Island. I mean, that's a place, it's a barrier island. So there needs to be a good video taken this weekend, as there will be. And there will also be a lot of stuff carried up from the small enclosure downstairs and brought up into the house. The house is at about 14 feet. It'd have to be a real monster for it to get it, but you know, the enclosure is not. The enclosure is at 5 or 6 feet, and we know how little coverage there is in an enclosure underneath a post-firm elevated building, which is in a special flood hazard area.
Yeah, and actually on that point, so that's great that we're talking about what to do basically before the storm hits, right? And talk to us a little bit about the importance of the pre-storm video and pictures, because we emphasize that a lot at the coalition. You know, it's we actually built it into our CRS material as well, which is document before anything happens. It could be a sunny day, but make sure you're documenting what is there. And for when there is a claim, tell us why that's so important.
it's anytime you're dealing with an insurance claim, it is the policyholder's responsibility to prove their loss. Now, the carriers assign an adjuster to help you do that. And you can help yourself truly before the claim even starts by recording condition and quantities, opening cabinets, taking your phone, if you're videoing on your phone, running them around through your cabinets, opens your drawers, take some video there, and mainly take videos, overviews of rooms as well, slowly. Because when we get there, so many people take such pride in ownership. It's amazing. It really makes you feel good, because you'll walk into a house that had 2 feet of water in it, and you'll think you could eat off the floor. It's so clean. Now, we know long term, if that floor is wooden and there's a surface covering on it, that subfloor is probably going to have to come out. But the big thing we're running into is contents. Policyholders being able to prove their contents loss or a degradation of condition. So if there is damage on your contents, carriers and FEMA really like to see documentation of every item possible through photos, and through photos showing damage. So you don't just take your video before the storm, after the storm, walk through and do the video again, if it's safe. Now, if it's not safe, get yourself somebody out there as a contractor who's used to dealing in that environment and get them to do it. And then take your stills, your still photographs. There's just no substitute for the policyholder grabbing all of this at the instant. So showing the damage where it was, because like I said, so many people clean their houses, clean their furniture, clean everything they can. You'll often walk in and go, did this house flood? And you have to reach and turn a piece of furniture around. Hopefully there's something in the house with particle board or something similar that really keeps a good line.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and so to that point, you're before the storm, you're documenting your pre-storm condition. And then of course there's during the storm where you're either hunkered down or you've evacuated. And now it's after the storm and you're taking the photos post damage. Now, what is the most important thing you emphasize the very first thing you do before you start doing any cleanup? Is it to make sure you take those immediate post-storm photos?
Beyond any doubt. We want to see the flooded house. The carriers want to see the flooded house. If it's a case where you needed to evacuate, then of course, when you get back, you do it. If it's a case where you may have some medical conditions where you cannot be trapped in and your street floods every time it rains or something, then talk to your neighbors, make sure they document it. Nothing says I flooded like a picture of your home in water. And as we said, documenting all the contents on the front end and then after the loss, because it's going to be emotional for you. This is stuff you've worked for your whole life. Yeah. So you got to have the game plan in mind, or have somebody in the home that has a little game plan. I always recommend people just doing a sheet that prepares them. When the storm's coming, these are the things we have to check off the list. And that builds a lot of personal safety as well as the claim itself, the property that's damaged and the coverage.
Yeah. Now after the storm, you show up, you take your post-storm pictures. Now what do? You don't have any, you have your insurance policy, which hopefully you grabbed before the storm, because, I mean, let's face it, right after a big event, right, or even small events, it may not be the easiest thing to do to actually grab the policy form and all the related information you need. Is there something specific you suggest when it comes to contacting the first place to go after the storm, or making sure you have that documentation?
I say if you're computer literate, or you have someone in your family who is, number one, put the company, your flood insurance company's name in your phone as a contact. Put the web address for your flood policy, because it's going to be different than your normal company's web address. So you're going to want to go in and go to floodconnect.whomever.com or whatever the case may be for that particular company. And if you have that documentation there, once you know your home's flooded, you simply you can click that link. If you have your login saved, you log in, you can download your deck sheet right there. You can report your claim on your phone or on a computer. I strongly recommend that. And most of the major email services have a drive function of some sort, a OneDrive, a Google Drive,
Sure.
and documents like that, your videos, your photos, upload them, put them in a place where we can get to them. And also you're going to run into the fact that most cameras nowadays, we call these cameras, don't we? Most cameras nowadays don't have a low resolution setting that makes it easy to email or transfer them unless they're in the cloud, in the storage space.
That's really good. That's a really good point. So I'm at the claim. I've taken my post-storm photos. Once I contact the company and they assign me a claims company and an adjuster, what's the next step? Walk us through that whole process of the contact between the adjuster, their arrival on the site, and what's some of the things that they'll be doing and asking.
Okay. I'll definitely hit some very important points on that. Once you report your claim, that claim goes into the queue at the carrier and it gets assigned out to an independent adjusting firm. That firm will then try to find whomever can be on the ground fastest or who is closest to you to assign the file to. So that will take time when there's a lot of files coming in. We've got technology now that makes it a lot easier for us, but it does take some time. So you will be called within 24 hours. I'll be honest with you, we have a really good contact within the first 12 hours usually, but 24 is not unreasonable because they're trying to, I encourage our guys just to call and touch the people and say, look, I'm going to answer a bunch of your questions right now. The most important things you can do are this, and have it ready. But you copy and paste and send it, have your insured to say, this is how you can help us get your claim documented and worked as quickly as possible. And then that adjuster is going to set an appointment. And if it's a big event, as in Sandy, there were areas we couldn't get into for weeks. And getting onto some of the islands in New Jersey and New York, we had adjusters sitting in line for 4 hours waiting to get on the island. So and the policyholder has to go through the same thing. So how many claims can you get done in a day when you're losing 4 of those hours waiting to get on the island? Hopefully FEMA's getting a little bit better at that at this point. As far as guidance to communities, especially the communities who have been hard hit in the recent past. But you're going to set that appointment. Your adjuster is going to show up and just have any documentation that supports your loss ready for them, whether it be the drive where you've already sent them an email link sharing that folder, or you've already emailed them the photographs. If not, and you have a little thumb drive handy when he shows up, that's great too. So long as you have a backup of any photos or documentation you give him. There is an app called TinyScan. And if you're out there and let's say you've had a prior loss, you had a big loss in 2012, and now it's 2020, you have another loss. Looks like it's going to be a big one too. And you have a folder, hopefully, or you've put up on the drive your repair receipts. And there's an app called TinyScan that's free, or if you're fairly solvent financially, you could pay the entire $4.99 for a lifetime subscription and get the premium version. And you literally can go one after the other, and it'll put you can put all your relevant stuff. I see my hands are moving all over the place and I'm not on the screen. Sorry about that. All the relevant items together in one scan from your phone. And then we move that up to the cloud, or if it's small enough, we email it and you're good to go. The adjuster's going to get there. He's going to want to photo document everything. No matter how many photos you took, he's got to take his photos in the order that makes sense to him so that he can work your claim in an order that makes sense to the carrier. And so I recommend, if you have questions for your adjuster, when he first gets there, ask him, say, I do have a lot of questions, because everybody does. This is your life that's just been turned upside down.
Yeah.
And so you go ahead and you get a game plan yourself, and you're going to learn his game plan when he gets there. He's going to say, hi, I've got these documents. I'm going to go outside and take photos and measurements outside and get the information off of your air conditioner. And I saw a storage shed back there. Well, that's locked. I'll have to, okay, that's fine. We'll get it in a minute. And then I always recommend that the policyholder walk with the adjuster through the house while he's taking photographs. And that way you can do things like open those drawers, and you can open them up and oh, well, they're empty. I've got photos of them with the clothes in there. It's in the cloud, the link I sent you. And so you walk through and you point out certain things to the adjuster while he's taking his pictures. And then I recommend that the policyholder sit down, work on the paperwork if they're not finished, or allow the adjuster to go back through the home and write his scope notes. Now, the reason we do that is we don't want to miss anything. We want to make sure that every penny that the policyholder is owed is addressed in the claim. So we don't want to go through a room and miss a wall heater because we were making our notes. I'm sorry, there we go, making our notes way up in the air like this. And we missed a wall heater because the policyholder was talking to us while we were walking around. But of course, the policyholder needs that time to talk to you. That's why I always suggest to do it during the picture. So anytime after the scope, the adjuster should have his scope sheet and go and explain to the policyholder, this is what I see, and this is what I'm going to recommend to the carrier that we pay for, these items. Look, you only had a few inches of water. You might want to get a technician to come out and give you a report on your furnace or your water softener or your appliances in the kitchen. That always helps, because if the lower control board gets submerged with salt water, it's going to, on the HVAC, it's going to shorten the life. So we want to make sure that we address that. And then at that point, once you're done and you've answered your questions with your adjuster, and you make sure you both have each other's contact information, he leaves, and then you sit and wait for a little while. If it's a big event, it's going to take a few weeks, and in cases like Sandy, months, because there was such a massive volume. If everybody has a heart attack in town, there's not an, if a quarter of the people in town have a heart attack, there's not enough cardiologists to take care of them. It's the same thing here. That's why you have so many guys come in from out of state to try to make up that gap. But then he's going to file his preliminary report and hopefully get you in advance. If you contents coverage, people, please get contents coverage. The contents coverage allows us to advance you without having the mortgage company's name on the check.
Oh, that's a really interesting point. That's a really interesting point. So the contents coverage actually gives you the ability to advance funds, even if it's actual cash value, but at least it's able to give you an advance in funds because the mortgage company has no say over that collateral.
Right. So it's an issue of insurable interest. In your home, if you have a mortgage and you're the one paying the mortgage, well, the mortgage company is the one who fronted the money. So you both have an insurable interest in there, and you both have to sign off on any payments regarding the building damage. Now, like we said, if it's contents, if you have contents coverage, it's huge that we'll be able to advance you on that, and there will not be a mortgage company's name on there. Because the flood policy, the normal NFIP policy, some of the private ones do have this, has no additional living expense allowance. It is strictly for the structure, the main structure, and any appurtenant structure that qualifies as an attached garage for a residential policy, and the contents and any permanently installed building at a fixed site on the property. That's for the dwelling form. Now, if we have any business folks on here, then you're looking at a commercial policy, which we call the GP, the general property policy. On that, only the named structure is covered. No appurtenant structures are covered unless there's some other qualifications in there.
Now you've walked us through kind of going through the claims process up until the point where the adjuster leaves and there's some time for them to adjust it and send the payment. One of the things that we have run into recently is this idea of reformation of coverage, right? The idea that the agents there's something wrong with the policy, and you go through the claims process and that's discovered. But I think sometimes in practice, reformation of coverage on a policy that's written wrong may not actually follow through the process as it's written in, say, the NFIP manual. So, like, for example, how far back does a examiner go, or does the adjuster go, or how detailed do they get in checking data construction, historic mapping, all that type of stuff?
Okay. On most policies, the adjuster is going to know and notice if there's an inconsistency, because he's got within a mile, hopefully, or a few miles, other claims. So if he's seeing different information on, if you look at the home and it looks brand new, then you might want to go online and check with a tax site. You might want to see if it is either been rebuilt or if it's been substantially improved, or whatever the case may be. But most of the time, in a big event, we're trusting the carrier and their process for vetting and underwriting the claim. Now, we do go out there, especially with a lot of policies that have been in place for many years, and you'll find that the underwriting has either changed or it wasn't quite perfect to begin with. And you may have some reformation of coverage or coverage amount issues, but that's not super common nowadays. In Hurricane Sandy, a lot of those policies have been in place for 20 years and hadn't had a loss. And so we had a lot of underwriting issues during Sandy, but we're fixed. But it didn't in the long term, the claim got handled and the people got paid. Speaking of the people getting paid, your adjuster is going to send you a copy of your contents and your building estimate when once he gets it completed for you to review. Now, if he missed something, you let him know. And if it's something you can't document, thank goodness you got your video. We can grab screen captures from. But also remember too, that flood claim is not closed. After you sign that proof of loss, it's not giving away any of your rights to make future claims on that date of loss, as long as we can document them and prove it.
And how long?
Don't worry about you missed a light switch, let's delay the claim.
Yeah.
We can do that in a supplement or.
Yeah, and how long is that supplemental window open? Because there was some time ago, there was a definitive window, and I know that has been changed over time. So how long is that window open in general?
I noticed Phil's on the call. He's going to love this one because we know the answer to that question. There's 60 days for you to file a signed proof of loss for your claim and your supplements. FEMA is also reasonable in the fact that they realize that's not really necessary, because during a big event, you can't get a contractor out there all the time quickly enough to uncover the wall and go, oh Lord, there's shiplap underneath that drywall. We didn't address that in the claim. Okay, well, we're going to for you. If it's damaged, we're going to address it for you. So in truth, the fair and reasonable measure is if you've got a documented loss, we can request a waiver from FEMA down the road if we find damage later. And FEMA can either say yes or no on the waiver request. Usually, if we have a decent reason, FEMA says yes. But yes, you may open another, we used to call them supplementals, but now we call them request for additional payment. And if it's documented, there's no issue normally in addressing a supplement down the road.
That's good to know. And, the other thing too, as we look at, the next step in the claims process for somebody that's had substantial damage, walk us through that process, the substantial damage process, because there's a lot of confusion out there that that designation is made by the adjuster and that the ICC payment is something that's made right away. I mean, to walk us right down the path of substantial damage.
Okay, so what does substantial damage mean? Substantial damage means that the structure was damaged to more than 50% of its value to rebuild. So when that happens, who makes that determination? The adjuster does not make that determination, but the adjuster does see, I believe my estimate's going to be over half the stick value of this home. And so he sends a form into the carrier and to FEMA that says, we think we have a case for substantial damage here. And what that leads to is your people from the county or the building department for the city, whatever the case may be, they come through and they will give you a letter, or you can go to them and say, look, this is my claim. I think I can get my house raised with ICC money, increased cost of compliance, which means what the government's willing to do through the policy. Now you have a statutory limit on the dwelling of $250,000. So if your damage was 234, then you'd have 26,000 available through ICC. The 30,000 that's currently the amount is not additional coverage. It's part of the statutory limit, which is 250,000. And I recommend people contact their congressman and say, look, let's get this raised to 50,000 or 60,000. I'm willing to pay a little bit more premium so that if something happens to my home, I can get it elevated. I can afford to get it elevated, because sometimes it takes more than 30 grand to get a house elevated. So when you get that substantial damage letter, you send it to your adjuster. He sends it to the carrier. The carrier assigns either that adjuster or another person, or they handle it in-house, that ICC claim. So they're going to guide you through that process. Like we have a very extensive letter that lays out every item that we're going to need, depending on what you want to do. Do you want to move your house to another piece of property so that we outside of a special flood hazard zone, so that we can pay for the additional foundation and pay for what it costs to move it up to the 30,000 or the statutory limit? Do you want to elevate your house? Well, it will certainly cover that too, and it will cover ingress and egress, the additional cost for the stairs. It'll cover moving the utilities up, moving equipment up as part of the ICC. You may also wish to say, hey, I had 7 feet of water in this house. I'm going to tear it down and rebuild it higher. Well, ICC complies there too. It's also available to you. Now, normally you have to be in a special flood hazard zone where a BFE is set, but every community has its own rules. For instance, we have claims from Florence that we're working the ICCs on, where the community had in their regulations after Matthew that any home within this community that was flooded during Matthew is now considered to be in a special flood hazard zone by the county, by the CF, by whoever the governing authority is, the city, county, the community. We call it the community in the flood program.
Yep.
And then those homes also qualify. FEMA allows, really when it comes down to it, the community is who decides whether you're substantially damaged. They also decide if you're outside of a normal special flood hazard zone, if there's a possible qualification there. And then they just have to tell us and give us on documentation how many feet the home has to be raised to be in compliance with them. So, there's also issues with flood proofing, which is often used, seems to be more often used on commercial, and just demolition. You can just demolish the home and you'll get paid whatever it costs to demolish and haul away the covered property.
Great. Well, that's great. And believe it or not, Clay, we are right at 10:30. And
we did make it through payment and even ICC.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say, is we really walked through the claims process as in a very detailed way in that amount of time. So,
Joe, before we sign off, I do want to say one thing.
Sure.
The documentation of the repairs from the loss.
Yes.
Keep it in a safe, dry place. Photographs taken throughout the repair process are key. It's even worth, making that part of your contract with your contractor.
Yeah, that's
So,
great. That's a great tip. And the documentation, I think if there was one thing to take away from today, it's that documentation becomes one of the most important things throughout the entire claims process.
and don't put the documentation in the bottom drawer.
Yeah,
Put
or in the
somewhere
lowest
high
area,
and safe
the
that will
elevated
not
at
be.
that lowest area. Yeah. Great. Well, thank you, Clay, very much. And just before we sign off, I want to let everybody know about next month's Flood Risk Friday. On September 18th, we'll be reviewing increasing bandwidth with help. So for those interested, the registration link is there. We'll be talking about how a new program that the MCC is involved in will help elevate homes through leveraging grant programs for communities. And we'll have some guests, Brian Baer from the Elevated Studio and Nick Burke from Blue Ocean Analytics. So thank you everybody so much for being here today. This is my contact. This is the coalition and my contact information. Become a member. It's free, and we appreciate everybody being at today's webinar. And we'll see you on September 18th. Thank
Thanks
you,
for having
Clay.
me, Joe.
Thank you.
My pleasure.